Hi there. Welcome to Infinite Stories. This is the podcast where we sit down and interview everyday people just like you and me. This is your host, Mitchell Vine, and boy, do we have an incredible story for you. Let's jump into this week's interview. We are here to talk about your story, so why don't you introduce yourself? Who are you?
Well, I'm Brad Johnson. Is that all you need to know, or do you need to...
Kind of up to you. However you want to introduce
Johnson.
yourself.
No.
Maybe introduce yourself as if we've never met.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Brad Johnson. I live in Ottumwa, Iowa. I work for Heartland Youth for Christ as one of the, I guess I could say I'm one of the Southeast Iowa area directors now. And I specifically focus on Ottumwa and helping with fundraising and stuff like that. I have a wife and two kids, a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they're amazing. I love my family. Jesus is first, but my family is, follows right up after that. I love God. I really try to put him first, not perfectly by any means, but he's definitely what I try to focus on in my life, and I definitely want to do that in whatever unique ways God has made me to do that. And music is a big part of my life too. I write music, I play guitar, bass, and drums.
At
try
once?
to sing.
Can you do it all at the same time?
For the most part, I can.
That's incredible.
Ish. I mean, not like whole drum set, but I can do I can kind of stomp a rhythm with my foot. Like I actually have a setup where I take a cajon and I turn a kick pedal the opposite direction so I can kick it at the same time as playing guitar. Got kind of a shaker on my hand that I'll use and then sing at the same time. So a little bit of a one-man band.
Man, have you seen that short film, The One-Man Band? I think Pixar made it. It was like this guy with just this ridiculous setup in his backpack, and he was just playing this like orchestra all by himself. You gotta find that. Funny. That's what I just pictured, and I'm not going to say you look like the guy because you don't, but it sounds like you would fit into what he can do. That's awesome.
That's funny.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's break apart your story, and every story has to start at the beginning. So, like, what's the earliest memories that you have of being a kid?
Oh, wow. Okay, we're going way back.
Well, that is where stories start, sadly.
That is where stories start. Well, I wasn't sure 100% where we'd be starting, but yeah. My earliest memories. I mean, I remember my house, first house that I lived in Rock Island, Illinois. I just remember the outside of it. I remember picking flowers along the driveway. I remember lots of that house, the upstairs. It had an attic that with a really narrow staircase that went up with kind of those steep, thin steps. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That are kind of easy to miss one. And I remember multiple times falling all the way down the stairs and getting the wind knocked out of me at the bottom of the stairs and thinking I'm gonna die. That's a memory.
That's a pretty clear memory.
Yeah, it's a very clear memory. And I did it once going down to the basement. We had one of those unfinished basements with a concrete floor, kind of creepy.
Mm-hmm.
I remember doing that a few times too. I was a clumsy kid, so I guess that's one revelation we've already gotten here.
You and stairs aren't friends. Good, check that.
No, but I haven't done that in a long time. So I must have grew out of it.
Oh, good. So. Good. I'm glad. That sounds like a habit you don't want to practice. So that's awesome. Well, what was it like growing up for you as a kid? Did you have any siblings? How was your relationship with your parents growing up?
Yeah. I have two brothers, and they're twins, 3 years younger than me. And that's it. Just the two brothers. They have been a handful, and all throughout. In different ways. We're great friends now, don't get me wrong, but growing up it was, I think from earlier years I remember things being a little bit hectic. They kind of did their own thing, because brothers, especially twins, they do tend to kind of build that connection between themselves. And so as long as I can remember, they always kind of had this special bond that I never really had quite that same connection with either of them, you know what I mean? And so I just remember that about them growing up. I remember the preteen and teen years got really rough. I will say just there was a lot of, I don't know how much I should say. I don't know if they're ever going to watch this. Are you
up to your discretion.
But it was rough, and they would say that too. It was really rough. And I was not a perfect kid either, but I mean they were in and out of trouble with the law, and a lot of, I would say, could I say violent fights at home, mostly between the two of them. And it was pretty rough, especially in the teen years. It was pretty rough growing up because I remember I spent a lot of my time hiding out in my room because it was just so hectic in the home. And so that shaped a lot of my teen years, was kind of retreating into myself because things were just so wild at home.
Is that where some of the musical natures started to appeal more, just out of the room?
Yeah, I would say so, because I started playing bass when I was 13. So I was in junior high, must have been 8th grade, and the friend of mine that kind of got me into music, he was playing guitar, and he's like, hey man, start playing bass and we'll start a band, kind of thing, and I was like, oh, super cool. And he actually talked like that. He was kind of an eccentric kid, and he was really into smoking weed. You know what I'm saying? And so that got me into that. And so I really went down kind of a wrong path with him as a friend for a while. But the good that came out of that was I did pick up an instrument, and I started following that story down. Freshman year of high school, I was hanging out with this friend that got me into music, along with just a whole bunch of other kids that were kind of trouble, bully types. Some of them were. It was kind of one of these deals where my friend was really connecting well with that group and being kind of accepted, but I wasn't. And so I was picked on a lot by that group, and I was trying to kind of fit in, but it was always felt like I was being hazed. And finally I just gave up. And so really by the summer of my freshman year, I didn't have any friends. I let go of that group, and it was good because we would go into this, as part of this group, I would go over to one of the friends from that group's house, and his mom just was like one of these parents that really could care less about what her kids do. And so the whole basement was just a druggy acid. I don't know how, there might have been worse, heavier drugs than that, running through there. But from what I saw, it was mostly weed and acid. And it was just a constant thing every day after school. And so thank God, I got out of that whole scene. And then again, the summer of my freshman year, after my freshman year, all I did was I worked on learning the guitar more, learning new songs, improving my technique, learning the fundamental scales and different things, and starting to write my own music. And so, yeah, that really did actually, the scenario at home along with the scenario at school and my friends, or lack thereof, really put me in that position where I just spent a lot of time on music.
Do you remember some of the first songs that you remember learning?
Oh yeah, it was all stuff like grunge stuff, out of the 80s, like Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, Pearl Jam,
Nice.
some of the more obscure bands that were one-hit wonders out of the 90s. Oh yeah, big time remember all that stuff. I still can play a lot of them. You know? So,
burned into the brain. That's what they do.
They are. Yep.
That's so funny. My little brother, he's been musically inclined his entire life, and I've always been super jealous, but there was one day that I remember listening to him play the piano over and over and over again to figure out this one song, and I was like, I think I just realized why I have no desire to be that musically inclined. Just that repetition over and over and over again. I'm glad that other people enjoy that, but there's a certain point I just can't do that anymore.
You gotta have that right mix of patience and drive. When the patience isn't there, you have to have the drive to keep you moving. You know what I'm saying? And when, you know what I mean, you have to have patience when you're just not getting there. You know what I mean? And so when the drive's not there, so it's just I feel like not everybody has that, and for some folks, it's just not something that they naturally can do very well, and so it takes a lot more patience and drive, and it's just not there. There's a lot of things for me, I'm more right-brained, but my dad, who was an engineer his whole life for the Corps of Engineers, he was way more left-brained. He can fix anything on a car, he can build anything, and that just is really hard for me sometimes, just to grasp practical things. I'm way more of let's just make up our way. Let's
let's wing it.
Let's just wing it. Yeah, we'll figure it out, right?
Oh, that's awesome. So left brain is more practical and right brain is more creative. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Cool. I know I've heard that at least once in my life, but I don't think I've ever done any deep research into that.
Well, that's what I think it is. Pretty sure.
But sounds like you know more than me. So I can't say you're wrong. I don't know. That's awesome. Well, kind of staying near the beginning of your story, another question that I really enjoy asking is, can you picture a time when you first understood sin, or like you understood what right and wrong was? Any memories come to mind?
Yeah. So, I definitely can remember, like, especially like specific sins, like recognizing them as sin and recognizing that they're serious.
Mm.
Like the first time I lied, I remember the first time I bold-faced lied to my mom, and I just that deep conviction. And I didn't even have like a super strong, like, so like my upbringing when it comes to spirituality was pretty much the Catholic Church. And again, people can find God in the Catholic Church. But the church I went to wasn't Bible based. It wasn't. I didn't understand the gospel. I really, I'd say like I understood that there was like 10 commandments. You know what I'm saying, and that I needed to like follow those. And I thought if I did those well enough, maybe God would accept me, kind of thing. And so I remember, which is not the gospel, but yeah, I remember when I lied the first time, it really cut through, and like just my conscience, just I knew it was wrong. I remember the first time I remember one time I called my mom. I can't remember what I called her, but I called her and named her her face. It might have been the B word, which is yes, really, and I really felt in that moment just a real strong conviction, and really I didn't understand the difference between conviction and condemnation. Like I could remember, I remember a lot of times, like, my brothers and I telling each other, oh, you're gonna go to hell, you're gonna go to hell, all the time. Like, saying, if one of us we'd always do this thing where we would be like trying to convince the other person that what we're saying is true, and we'd finally get to the point where we'd have to pull out the I swear to God, I swear to God, and then the other one would be like, no, you're lying, you're gonna go to hell, I can't count how many times that conversation came up. But no, like I said, like I remember very specific times where I stepped out of line, and just I wouldn't have been born again, so it was my conscience convicting me. But yeah, I remember lots of specific times of that.
That's awesome. Well, not awesome, but it's very interesting to be able to acknowledge sin from way back when. Like, I remember saying this to a buddy a while ago. I don't know why. I was being really stupid, but I just remember saying I was sinning as soon as I was walking out of the womb. Like, it just was natural to me, And Scripture lays that out very clearly as well, that we are not innately good when we are born into this world. We have the flesh, and even a Bible study that I did with my siblings the other day, it's just that idea of what comes out of a person is what defiles them, and that there's just so much layers upon layers of the effects of sin, realistically. So kind of building off of that from the middle school time frame, and maybe more into the high school time frame as well, were there any specific lies that you remember believing about yourself or about the people around you in those time frames?
Well, I definitely remember, I do. I remember believing lies about myself, about my value, that my value was found based on how popular I was, Yeah. I definitely believed that, I definitely believed that if I had enough friends or had the right friends, that gave me worth, you know what I mean? Definitely believed that. There was a lot of lies. There were lies that, people, bullies, would call you all sorts of names. You know what I mean? Everything, back then, I don't know what all I can say on this podcast, but, like stuff about like, a big common word back then was FAG. Kids would call each other that all the time. And I remember I had a baseball team one time where the whole team, like, they hated me. I don't know, like, maybe it was because I was pretty crappy. but they just decided, well, you're an FAG, right? That must be the right name for this kid because he can't catch the ball very well. So, so I remember, the enemy will use stuff like that to get you to start questioning, like, was that what I am? You know what I mean? So I remember, definitely lots of different things about my worth, lots of different things about related to what I just shared. Like, there was a lot of things that the enemy will try to use to question your value, your identity, everything. And I remember lots of stuff like that.
So, looking back at all of that and maybe transitioning through the high school years, were there any more pivotal moments through the high school years that kind of shaped your character?
So a little bit, yeah. I didn't actually come to Christ till after high school.
Mm.
Um, but what I will say is there were little touch points where I could see that God was at work.
Mm.
So, as a for instance, so I just shared that by the summer after my freshman year, I didn't have any friends. Come around to the beginning of my sophomore year, that was a challenging time because I started the school year without anybody. So, lunch period, study hall.
Mm.
I didn't really have anybody to sit with. And I would say my pride was hurt from that. And instead of actually going to lunch or going to study hall, I actually would go. We'd have resource rooms where you could go and maybe a teacher could help you with math or whatever you're struggling with. And so I would actually go to a resource room every lunch. I never ate lunch. In every study hall, I would go to a resource room by myself because it hurt my pride to sit there by myself in the lunchroom. You know what I mean? Or it was partly pride, but it was also partly fear. Because like those same bullies were there, like, will I find any friends? The fear of that. And so to me, it was easier to avoid it. You know what I'm saying? And so what I found, and there's a point in all this, when I would spend time in the resource room, I actually found myself praying. And so even though I didn't really have a strong sense of what it was meant to be a follower of Christ, I did know about prayer. And so I would talk to God and I would spend time just pouring out my heart. Just like I would to a friend, and I think I kind of, just to be honest with you, it wasn't the most faith-filled times of prayer. It was more of like, maybe, God, if you're there, maybe you'll help me. I don't know, kind of thing, Yeah, but I used it as an opportunity to vent and get stuff out. And because there was never a teacher in those resource rooms, it's kind of weird. But anyway, so anyway, I remember praying things like, God, I don't have anybody. Like, I don't have any friends. Like, I felt alone. And I remember praying for stuff like that, praying for things to improve. And what's interesting is then, come my junior year, and it might have been actually at the end of my sophomore year. I can't remember if it was the beginning of my junior or the end of my sophomore year, but I started to build some connections with who would become my best friend. His name was TJ. And then a guy named Paul, who TJ played drums, Paul played bass, and we formed a band. So that actually was, in so many ways, it's interesting. Like, God, I really believe in some ways answered my prayers. And it wasn't that everything related to the band was a godly thing, but it really, God used this band that I would go on to play with all the way into my, early college years, actually just first year of college, would use it like in the sense that I was able to find confidence and I was able to find that I had value and that I had unique giftings. And it really, in a lot of ways, pulled me out of kind of the depressing cycle of loneliness and just not having anybody around me. And really, it gave my last 2 years of high school a lot of joy, I guess you could say. There was not good stuff that came with it because, in some ways it turned into, party scenes and things like that. And, the music wasn't always, wasn't God glorifying for sure. And sometimes was straight up not godly at all. But I do see God's mercies upon me woven through that, I guess is what I'm saying.
How so?
And so, like, what?
No, I was just, how so?
Well, what I do remember is that, like, again, it gave me a sense of, like, how I didn't feel like I had any value. Like, I could see that I do have value and I do have unique abilities that, again, I'm not a practical left brain kind of person, but I do have other giftings, you know what I'm saying? And it made me see that I have worth. And even though the worth isn't found in being popular, other people spoke into my life and helped me see that I'm not worthless. You know what I'm saying? And through that. But what I do remember is that one thing that happened in the midst of all that is I remember feeling, I knew God had blessed me and really answered a lot of prayers. But so as I got more and more into a party scene and just more of just things that were ungodly, like, I felt that conviction that not only now is it wrong, I also I'm basically backstabbing the one who's helped me. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just, I'm not honoring the one who I know helped me. Even though my revelation of God was limited, I did recognize that he had answered my prayers, or at least he had been helping me through the music and through the band and stuff like that. And so I always felt this sense of, I'm really just kind of just dishonoring and disrespecting him as I did this stuff, and I wasn't, well, you can always compare yourself to others. I drank, you know what I mean? I smoked, I was into, stuff. I got deeper into stuff that I shouldn't have, a variety of things. And, and I did feel that conviction that, I was kind of going against the one who got me out of it all, who brought me into a better place. But, yeah. So anyway, but anyway, God helped me develop a sense that he's a good father, that he cares for me, that he cares about the things in my life that matter to me. It also, you asked, what kind of things built into my character. I feel like that did. I'd say that was probably the most significant God experience I had in my high school years. Was just that.
So then, leading out of the high school years, you said pretty clearly that the band is pretty heavily involved in the story. What happened between the transitions between high school and college years? What's the story there?
Yeah. So when I graduated, started my first year at Scott Community College. I was going to do 2 years at a community college and then transfer to a university. And still, actually getting deeper into partying as we went into my freshman year of college. Yeah, just, even started dabbling into smoking weed again. I was looking at pornography. I was definitely off on that end. It was getting worse and worse. And my freshman year of college, I had an atheist professor who, he was very outspoken about it. He would kind of interweave the atheism into the way he taught Western civilization, weaving his opinion into everything. It's like, and of course, as a student, you're kind of impressionable and you're like, well, this guy must know better than me, So I just kind of, and that's such a stereotypical thing, but it really does happen. And so I just started kind of buying it, kind of hook, line, and sinker. And I started dating a young lady that was also a freshman at Scott. And her family went to a church, Vineyard Church, in Davenport. And she would just take me on Sundays to church with her. And I was honestly I was open to it. And what was kind of funny, I always thought was interesting, was that when I was younger, when I was actually even in junior high, I believe it was, at this Vineyard Church used to do radio commercials. And they were just really weird. They were like, I just remember the tagline. They'd run it on Planet 93.5, which was the alternative rock station. And they would have rock music playing. And they're like, this ain't your grandma's church, or something like that. And I was like, I remember telling my parents, I'm like, I want to go to that church. And I asked them multiple times, and they never took me. And it just so happened that my girlfriend went to that church.
That's awesome.
Isn't that funny? So they brought me to it, and she brought me to that church on Sundays. And I just remember feeling just right out of the, it didn't take more than 1 or 2 Sundays that I just felt my heart so drawn to what they were talking about. And I don't know if I got this from a message that they had given, but I came home one day and what was resonating through my heart and my mind was that God is not first in my life. And it just would not leave me alone. I was borderline kind of tormented by it. God is not first in my life. And I knew he needed to be. And I remember kind of coming to that point where I was counting the cost. Am I willing to give up everything and let him be first in my life? And I remember finally just, in tears, just pouring out my heart to God and just not even knowing what I really was getting into, but just knowing that I wanted him to have everything. I give up everything. I want you to be first in every way. Make that happen. Was my prayer. I'm saying, make that happen. And what I remember really, it was the next big thing that happened was I remember seeing my girlfriend, I don't know if it was a day or two after that, but she started kind of pulling away from me. She didn't want to hang out with me anymore. She didn't want to be around. It was really strange, and it went on for a good week or two before I worked up the courage to be like, she was still hanging out with me, but I could tell she was distant and didn't, something was off. And I remember asking her, hey, I can tell something's off. What's going on? And she finally let it out, and she said, look, I feel like God is telling me that we're not supposed to date anymore. And when she said that, it was interesting because God gave me a peace immediately, like, this is right, this is true. There was elements to the relationship that weren't honoring God, and she was an idol to me. She was like really, really important to me, like too important. And so like I immediately had a peace about it. But as time went on, really within a week or so, I let those thoughts say like why would God do this? That doesn't make sense. Like this, I reasoned my way back into a place of saying, no, this isn't right. Kind of angry and thinking that she had some ulterior motive in saying that, you know what I mean? And so I fought it for a little bit, but I finally did let go and just gave it all to God and trusted. And sure, it was God for sure. She was hearing God correctly about us not needing, we shouldn't have been together. And it was interesting. Like my first big test as a believer was I just started struggling with depression, really bad, like right out of the gate after I became a believer. And a lot of it was related to I was struggling with a lot of mental warfare, and I didn't understand that when you come to know Jesus, like now you've stepped out from the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of light, and now Satan will just go after your mind. And I didn't have anybody to explain that to me, and so I just let those thoughts just really just wreck me in my mind in a lot of ways, and I didn't know how to renew my mind. I was very much a baby Christian that was like kind of being attacked and kind of incapable of really defending myself. Thankfully, I did have a few older gentlemen that had followed Christ for a while that kind of started taking me under their wing, recognizing that I was very serious about my walk with Christ, and just didn't even I was reading the Bible 1 to 2, 3 hours a day. Like I was just some days longer, just constantly in the Word, constantly in the red letters, but so often not understanding my salvation, always reading it from the context of, well, man, am I taking up my cross enough to honor God and therefore be worthy of Him? Am I just always never seeing it from the point of an understanding that I'm saved by grace through faith, not by my works, always seeing it from the perspective of I'm just never doing enough. And I would try to share Jesus with people, I would think I'd have to get everybody saved. So I would go into my school and I would just go from table to table at the lunchroom and just start sharing Jesus with them, sharing my testimony, trying to preach to them. And I would just, everybody I could, I would be driving home from somewhere and I'd stop at a gas station and I'd just start talking to people, constantly. Everywhere I went, I thought I had to do enough to just somehow earn God's favor. I did not understand that God had actually adopted me, while I was still a sinner. Christ died for me and He forgave me as I was, and that in view of His mercy, I was to present myself as a living sacrifice, not in order to get His mercy. I thought I had to somehow obtain it through a lot of sacrifice and suffering and hard work. You name it, man.
Everlasting list, yeah.
Yeah, and so part of that spiraled me down into depression, where ultimately I got put on 7 types of medicine, was put in the hospital, and I remember the day that it kind of hit rock bottom. I was sitting there in a wheelchair, and because the medicine was literally causing my muscles to cramp up, and I was just not able to move, and I was pretty much unresponsive, and all my old friends came to visit me, and they were like, who is this guy? And I felt so bad because I felt like my testimony, where is it at? All they see now is this guy who they know has, I ditched them all. Don't get me wrong, I tried to keep the friendships I could, but some of them just didn't. They're like, we don't want anything to do with somebody who's, Jesus freak. But I remember that day when they all came to visit me, and I just wish they could have seen something that encouraged them in their faith, to see that maybe this is worth believing. And so I never understood that at the time. Why did God allow that to all happen? Now I know that not everything that happens, just because it happens, doesn't mean that that's God's desired will. to
Mm.
happen. You know what I'm saying? That's why Jesus prays, when he's given the disciples the model for prayer, he
Mm.
talks about, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It implies that it's not always done. That wasn't something that was part of God's desired will, I believe. I believe a lot of that was attacks of the enemy that ideally I would have overcome those and been able to, but God uses everything, right? He
Mm.
uses all
Oh
things
yeah.
for him. And so in the midst of all that, I know, like I've had opportunities since then that, Paul has been able to see that, I'm not out of my mind. I was in that time. God has done a lot of healing,
Mm.
rescuing me from depression, rescuing me from anxiety. I was diagnosed with other stuff at the time. It was horrible. They told me I was supposed to be in and out of the hospital my whole life. That's how bad it was. That was my prognosis from my doctor. And I got a second opinion from Iowa City, and they said it was worse. So it's really a miracle that I don't take any medicine. I don't have to ever see a doctor for any of this stuff. I mean, I was taking medicine to counteract medicine. That's how bad it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's by God's grace that, I trusted him. Psalm 34, righteous person faces many troubles, but the Lord comes to the rescue every time. I don't believe it's God's will for us to be depressed. I don't believe it's God's will. I really don't. I mean, I believe that God may allow it for a season, but I really do believe that if you hang in there and stay in a place of faith and obedience with him, he will always pull you out of that kind of stuff. I
Mm.
really believe that. And that was, at the time, I was fighting with that when I was in the hospital, with that exact thought. I had some people tell me, well, hey, maybe you'll just be depressed your whole life. You just got to trust God. And I had other people say, no, trust God. He's going to deliver you from this. And I was wrestling, like, I just want the truth. I just want the truth. And I remember my nurse, who was a believer, she would talk to me, and I told her, like, I'm about ready to like, kind of curse God and die kind of thing.
Mm.
Like, that's where I was at. I was just at the end of it all. And she was like, you're sawing the branch. If you do that, you're sawing off the branch that you're standing on, because he's holding you up, and he will be your deliverer, was kind of the context. And yeah, and he did. He delivered me. He saved me from what would have absolutely ruined my life. I wasn't supposed to be able to hold down a job. I mean, just the normal responsibilities of life, kind of expected for that not to be something I could handle. And God really taught me how to overcome it all.
Mm. So what happened after that season of depression and the hospitalized state?
Yeah, after that, so like I got out of that and went into a day treatment. So I went from like a, kind of a week being in that kind of 24-hour lockdown kind of unit to being just kind of in a, hour or two a day kind of treatment thing. Actually, it was longer than that. I think it was actually almost like a 8 to 5 thing. But I went to that for a while, and just continued to like trust God and just continue to renew my mind to the Word, because a lot of my trouble came from wrong thinking. You know what I'm saying? And thinking along with the way the world thinks instead of renewing it to what God says. And so I continued to renew my mind, changing the way I thought. Not letting like spiral kind of thoughts that take you downward. Just learning to control that and make it obedient to Christ. And yeah, that was really, I finally got to a point where I was able to be stable enough to get out of there. I finished up college. I finished up at St. Ambrose in Davenport, which was a great experience. And I honestly, those were some of the best years of my life, because I was finally getting healthy again. It almost felt like I was a dead person who got a second chance at life. You know what I'm saying? Because I had been told this is the end of your life, basically. And I remember going back to school and it being like everything was new. Like there was such a joy. Like I'm actually alive. Like, and I'm not depressed, and I'm able, and I made a lot of friends. I started another band.
How many
This time
bands
it
is this
wasn't-
now?
Yeah, this is number 2.
Okay.
Yeah, I always had to have music. Yeah, and just God worked through all of that, and God used, like, God always was challenging me to step out and share Jesus with people here and there. But this time it was not out of fear that I wasn't doing enough. It was much more the way it's supposed to be, where it's an overflow of what He's already done in me, rather than it being me trying to earn my way. And it was a wonderful time, because I got to start learning to walk in His grace and what it meant to have a real relationship with Him, and learning that He's a good and loving God who cares about every detail of my life. And that was awesome.
Hmm. That's awesome. So then after those college years, what happened? Where'd you go?
Well, after my college years, so I went to school for marketing, and I'll tell you, that was a challenge in and of itself, figuring out what I was going to do, because I had just, like, so I'm coming out of my years in the community college where I accepted Christ. I wanted, ever since I've come to Christ, I've never looked at my future as something that's up to me. I've always looked at it as like, I'm giving it completely to you. God, you lead me. Which, and I think that's what we all do as believers, or we ought to do. And and so I remember just saying, God, like, what do you want me to do? Because I didn't have a clear calling. Like, it wasn't, I knew that marketing and advertising always was something I'm like, that's kind of cool. And it takes an element of creativity. I kind of thought it was interesting. And I just felt like God just said, like, yeah, go for it. Just start going that direction and I'll guide you. And so I went to school for marketing and it did well. And yeah, so right after school, like, I had started getting into a group called Youth Hope, which had an after-school program, like actual youth centers in Rock Island and Moline. And so I would help out at their youth program, mostly in Rock Island. And I did a summer as a camp counselor. And so it kind of made sense to possibly do youth work. And again, my heart was just to honor God in whatever capacity that looked like. And so Boys and Girls Clubs of the Mississippi Valley was hiring. So I actually started, and they're not Christian, but there's a lot of opportunity to really pour into students. And so I tried that, and I worked for Boys and Girls Clubs of the Mississippi Valley for it wasn't super long. It was a year and a half, maybe, or two. And then I think I'm trying to remember, those years are kind of foggy, but I did an internship with Happy Joe's as a marketing internship. I kind of bounced around between like youth stuff and marketing stuff. I worked for a little while with Chick-fil-A doing marketing. I did something that was really unique. I did pre-need funeral home sales for a little bit. I
what did that look
kind
like?
of bounced all over. That's kind of probably the oddest one. That's probably the most unique job that I worked at in that window of time. But I even worked at the Corps of Engineers, where my dad worked for a little bit as a contract specialist, which that was stressful and not my thing. So I bounced around a bit. I wasn't developing the most attractive resume, that's for sure. But
I understand.
yeah, it's all good, and God can redeem that. So, but I'll tell you, man, it all came to a point. I actually was struggling to make ends meet. I had been living in Davenport. One of my brothers and I shared an apartment, and I was struggling to make ends meet. I actually moved back in with my parents for about a year or so. Maybe it was a little longer. But either way, I met who's now my wife, Cassie. We did this. I always hesitate before I say this because I don't know if it's shame or I'm anticipating someone to laugh at me. But we did Christian Mingle, like it's an online Christian singles site. And yeah, we both kind of were at that point where like, okay, maybe we'll try this. So
and it worked.
We tried it, and it worked. Yeah, so we met each other, and yeah, we did kind of this long distance couple of dates where she lived in Ottumwa, I lived in Bettendorf, and so we met in Burlington, we met in Iowa City. We had a few of these days where we just kind of hang out together like that, and we really hit it off, and I really found that she was a great. Not only was I, obviously attracted to her, she was a great best friend. Like, just an amazing person with a big heart, that I really I fell in love with her personality, I would say first. You know what I'm saying? And just, there's a lot of big egos out there, and there's a lot of people that, I don't know. She just, to me, was always this down-to-earth, just super humble-hearted, sweet young lady, and so I really enjoyed being with her, and eventually I got to a point where I just was praying, like, God, do you want me to take the step of moving? Because we can't do a long-distance dating forever. Yeah. And God just made it clear. I fasted about it. Like, became really clear, like, okay, take the step. So I moved to Ottumwa, got a job at a TV station as an account executive selling TV. At the time, it was just TV advertising. And moved into an apartment in Ottumwa. And really, within I think 3 months later we were engaged. It was quick. It was quick. And then like 6 months later we were married. So I mean the whole process was like a year. It really wasn't that long.
As it should
Um,
be.
yeah, yeah. It was short and sweet. Um, and so and I'm so grateful because she's the most amazing mom and I have amazing kids. We're super
Mm,
grateful. I worked at the station for about 12 years. And during that time, God really, uh, I would say, I've had some kind of revelation about kind of just the way my life has gone. And there's been kind of like if you could look at it as like a topography, you could see, peaks and valleys. And I had a really long valley season before I moved to Atumwa. And then God brought me into like a really stabilized, established time. Like,
mm,
I think it's in First Peter 5 where it talks about like after you suffer for a little while, God will take you and establish you. And and He brought me into a season of really being established and just things going smooth and kind of predictable, and actually almost
mm,
being bored, which I'm like, I'm used to things being crazy
mm,
and difficult. And things were actually relatively easy, and things were just felt, yeah, good, and so I had kind of a mountaintop, kind of a coming out of the valley and into a stabilized, more mountaintop experience for about 5, 6 years. And God, during that time, like I was on a street evangelism team. That's always been a big thing for me. I don't go out thinking I have to get people saved anymore. I just go out with that overflow of, what, I want to be bold for Him. I want people to know Jesus. And so, I ended up leading that team for a while, and that was cool. We had multiple churches represented, and we go out and share Jesus. I was a volunteer youth pastor at the church I was at, so I got to minister in those ways, and God used that. And then I kind of stepped into, after about 6 years of an account executive, I stepped into the local sales manager position, which with that kind of, for me, came the sense that I got to prove myself. You know what I'm
mm,
saying? I really felt like I needed to. Like I didn't feel like I don't know. I felt like I'd never been a manager before. I felt like I needed to really start taking it more seriously. And up until that point, my job had been kind of felt like I was a double agent to some degree because as I was going out and talking about advertising, God would open up doors and I'd be able to share my testimony and pray with somebody, or I got to
mm.
lead an exec to Christ in his meeting room. I mean, there was cool things that God opened up doors, as I was just going about my daily life. But when I became a manager, I was like, okay, nose to the grindstone. And even though there was some truth to that, like, yeah, I had to take it more seriously, I did lose a lot of that focus on, it's time to, every day I got to be surrendered to Him. And
Mm,
He's first. Don't get me wrong, we honor God by doing our job well, but at the end of the day, I'm His. I'm not owned by my company.
mm,
And so I really felt like I lost quite a bit of that focus as a manager. And then about 4 years ago, God gave us a vision to start a youth center. And this was something that was like, what does that even mean? Like, I haven't done youth stuff in forever, not like that at least.
mm,
Um, but we knew that this is what God said, so we just started taking steps of faith, starting out by connecting with Parnell and getting connected with Youth for Christ, and started, working to start even just the minimum of just an event in Ottumwa. Let's just start somewhere.
mm.
So that's what we started with, and now we've had 2 dodgeball tournaments in Ottumwa, and we've got an after-school program at Evans Junior High. We've got another group that's multi-church represented that's focused on how can we better reach youth with the gospel in the area. And so I'm really happy about where we're headed and what God's doing. Obviously, I started full-time with Youth for Christ back in January. But, yeah, we're just trusting, though, that eventually it's going to kind of work its way into an actual youth center. Because
Mm.
that's what God has given us a vision for.
Awesome.
There it is.
Awesome.
Birth
How's
to
that
now.
feel? That's awesome. That's so awesome, man. Well, I've got some questions, kind of like to reflect back on everything that we just walked through.
Okay.
A lot of
Yep.
people in Christian circles, they typically have a phrase where they call a salvation moment or an aha moment. Was that something that you would say happened very clearly in your story, or did it look differently for you?
Yeah, my salvation moment was when I called out to Him. And even though I didn't understand when I called out and I said, "You're not first," I need you to be first. I didn't understand. I just knew I believed in Jesus. I knew that he wasn't first, and I made him first. That was my salvation moment. Now, did I understand the details of his grace, or did I understand what it meant to be born again? Did I understand his Holy Spirit came in and brought to life my dead spirit? No, I didn't understand that, but it was definitely the moment that he came in.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And that redemption that you've experienced, how does that play out in your job and your marriage and your parenting? What does that look like for you, acting out with redemption?
It's constantly recentering myself on his lordship. Just that but his lordship isn't just that everything needs to line up with him. It is, but it's also that everything depends on him. Like I guess what I mean is that I want everything to be aligned with his will in my life. And so just constantly staying in that place where, and I'm not saying I always do it, right? Like I can't count how many times I have to apologize to my son or my daughter because I missed it, But it's always coming back to it, right? Because we're practicing righteousness, like it says in 1 John. Practicing sin means that it's just like that. You're practicing. You're working towards it. You're not making any effort to change it. You're practicing it. Practicing righteousness means you're working on it. You could still be missing it in certain areas, but you're practicing it because you're moving towards the righteousness, right? Because you're repenting when you mess up, you're seeing the need to change, and you're making effort towards that, relying on him. That's still practicing it. So for me, it's continually recentering myself on his lordship, but also recentering myself on him as my rock, my helper, my strength, the only one that's going to get me through everything. The only one that's going to, honestly, since I've been doing this Youth for Christ stuff, man, this has been, how many times I've been honest and vulnerable saying, like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm just, like, trusting God.
I'm just here.
I'm not that good at it. Like, it's just been me just really being like, God, you've called me to do this, so you're going to equip me, right? And he does. And so, yeah, I think that's hopefully answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite parts of a story, or like the piece of a story, is the mentor or the guide character in stories. Is that something that you experienced in your story? Were there any guides or mentors that kind of brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, so like I said, when I first came to Christ, there was, one or two that kind of came alongside me here and there, but it wasn't a consistent thing. I did have one mentor who he was actually mentoring me right before I moved from the Quad Cities to Ottumwa. And I remember, of all the people that I would say had a mentor role in my life, he had probably the most impactful. And it was mostly because he helped me overcome, I've already mentioned I used to struggle with pornography. I don't anymore, but it would have been 13, 14 years ago. He was just very straight with me, and he held me accountable, and he was like, there was no gray area. Like, if I told him that I looked at something, he would just be straight with me, and he would not beat around the bush and like, you gotta stop. And I just appreciated his boldness with me, and it really helped me kind of hit it home for me. Like, yeah, at what point do you stop? And you gotta rely on Holy Spirit strength. It's a really tough battle. A lot of guys face it, in ladies, you know what I mean? But it's something that you gotta kick. There's no gray area. You gotta get past it, and there's grace to help you through it, and there's grace to forgive you when you're battling through it. But it was because of him that I overcame it that 13, 14 years ago. And and really, I believe that God wouldn't have provided me with a wife. Like, he was waiting for me to see if I'm faithful, and trustworthy. He's not going to put one of his daughters in a situation where she's going to get hurt over and over again. So that I would say was one of the most impactful mentoring experiences I had, was that, and that's something I hope I can be, and just what I mean by that is the kind of mentor that says it like it is when they need to. Obviously there's, speak the truth in love, and that's what this mentor was for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, you even nailed my next question too. It was like, do you desire to be a mentor yourself? And I know from personal experience, I've seen you do that with youth specifically. So that's really awesome. Well, I've got a fun question now. We've waded through a lot of heaviness, and so
Okay.
Typically, I only offer 2 options with this question, but for you, I'm going to add a third just because I'm pretty sure you'll pick the third option. So typically, I ask, are you more of a book person or a movie person? But for you, I'm going to add music. Which one would you pick if you could only have one for the rest of your life?
Oh, for sure, I'm a music person.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
figured. But follow-up
Yeah.
question. If you could make an album capturing the story of your life, what would you want it to be called?
Oh, that's a really hard question. Like, that's the kind of question that I need to think about for a week, man.
What?
Yeah, no, I'm serious. That's hard. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it would just have to be like, I don't know, like trust God or something like that. I don't know, like just I don't know, Beauty for Ashes or something. Although that sounds more like a woman's art album.
I mean, if it works, it
Beauty.
works.
I don't know, man. Just like, yeah, that's a tough question, but somewhere along those lines, maybe.
All right. I like it. I like asking
Yeah.
that. One of the ones that I just finished recording with someone, they kind of responded with like, "That's like asking me what I want on my tombstone." I was like, "Exactly. That's the point." But man, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm kind of coming to the end of the questions that I would typically ask. But what would you say to encourage or challenge someone who is scared of sharing their story? How would you encourage them?
Well, I mean, I would just say that God already knows the truth. And I guess I need to say this even to myself, because as I share what I shared, some of it I got in the back of my mind. I'm thinking, gosh, do I want that all out there? But it's the truth. And we all have those stories. We all have stories, and our culture wants to turn us into these people that have to hide everything because we're afraid of what people might think, or we're afraid of what might happen if we're honest. But God already knows the truth, and He's ultimately the only one that it really matters. And not only that, there's promises in the Bible where Jesus promises that nothing that's hidden will remain hidden. It's not going to stay hidden anyway. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like it's better to just be honest and vulnerable than to keep it hidden and wait for it to be revealed. And there's so much power in it too, especially when we realize that we all have stories. We all have things that we've done that we're not happy about, that we're ashamed of, or at least that we maybe were ashamed of, but God delivered us from that shame. We all have that if we're honest. And the people that act like they don't, I mean, maybe they have the most significant things that they can't share, or they don't feel they can. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that that's something that should make us suspicious or anything of people, but I'm just saying we all have stories, I mean, we all, it does give God glory when we do share them and point to the fact that, I'm totally a different person. I would not even be close to what I am right now in terms of what matters to me, in terms of how I treat people, in terms of even just my ability to live, like to have a family, to have a job. Like, that's all God. Like, it's all God. Like, all of it. There's a kid who was in campus life just yesterday at Evans, and just right out of the gate, he's like, I didn't even know he went to church. I knew he was a believer, and he's like, last year I was in and out of suspension every single week, it seemed like, or something, and then he started going to church and he found God, and now he never gets suspended. And I'm just like, I mean, there's just countless story after story after story. It reminds me of that new Brandon Lake song where it's like, how many hospitals said it's impossible, can't count them. You know what I'm saying? Like, just testimony after testimony. You can't count them. Every believer has a testimony, and don't be afraid to share yours.
Absolutely. Man, I love that. That song, too. I actually forgot about that song. You just reminded me of that song.
Yeah, it's a good song.
You would know. You're the music guy.
I'm a music guy.
That's awesome. Well, I only have one last question, and that is there anything else you sense God wants you to share on behalf of anybody who'll be listening to this podcast?
Not really. I feel like I've talked to the point that I'm red in the face. Literally.
Yep. Typically after a podcast, I'm just like drinking so much water. I'm like, oh, my throat's so sore.
Yeah. Nope, man, I've shared like everything, so I don't really know what else to share. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for your honesty, your vulnerability, and your willingness to come on the show. This is awesome. I've got a running joke with how I typically end the podcast, and I end with a high five with my guest. And so I
Okay.
would like for you to pick a number between 1 and 10, please.
Okay. 7.
7. All right, so we're going to count down from 7. And when we reach that final number, we will high five the camera to make it look like we are high fiving each other. All right?
Super cool. All right, man.
All right. So 7, 6, 5,
Uh,
4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much for listening to this week's Infinite Story. If it resonated with you, send it to someone you think would be blessed by it. If you would like to share your story, please reach out to us at infiniteideas.studio. You never know how far the impact of your story can reach. Take care now.